in the rubble which of course was so difficult to get to. You can see when you see pictures of the outside of the building that it's a very precarious situation, that it is just really, really in chaos, and of course just a construction nightmare. But they had been hearing pings first the day before, then yesterday, and now we're hearing that they have gotten the black boxes. They're in possession. The black boxes from the plane which had taken off from Dulles Airport and had ultimately been turned around and crashed into the Pentagon. John?
All right, thank you very much. Bob Franken reporting live there. And now we want to share something with you that will be shared around the world. It is 3 minutes of silence honoring the lives lost. Many of those not Americans, several Europeans, were also killed in the attack on the World Trade Center.
31 countries were represented in the offices and businesses of the Twin Towers. People all over the world and in Europe are expressing their grief.
And we will share the 3 minutes of silence with you now as CNN takes you around the world on this day of mourning.
From Dublin to Moscow, nations of Europe, nations around the world are marking this day along with the United States, marking their sorrow and their grief that's felt here perhaps most powerfully, but shared by allies and by countries even that the United States doesn't really consider its friends.
That's right. The NATO alliance had asked for that 3 minutes of silence around the world as a show of solidarity with the Americans, as well as honoring the losses of several Europeans, thousands of Europeans, as well as people of Middle Eastern descent who were lost in the attack on the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. We bring that to you from London's Heathrow Airport, Paris's Eiffel Tower. It is heartening indeed to see people around the world gather in such a moment.
Sometimes we say that the whole world is watching, but this is one event that the whole world did watched in horror, and now grieves together.
And we're glad to bring it to you.
Let's take a moment now to bring you up to date on the investigation that's fueled by some of this sadness and fury. Early today, the U.S. Coast Guard boarded a Carnival Cruise Line ship off Miami, and they've detained two people who authorities say have, and we're quoting here, a history of hijacking.
Yeah, they're not saying much more than that right now. And overseas, in the Philippine capital of Manila, a raid on a hotel room by Philippine and American agents. They are reporting that they found bomb-making materials, or rather residue there, but so far they've not made any arrests. Also in New York, police have arrested, though, at least 8 people, and law enforcement sources say they were carrying fake documentation. In fact, one had a phony pilot's license. He was arrested in the pilot's lounge. Let's go to CNN's Garrick Utley for more on the latest on the rescue and the investigation out of New York City. Good morning again, Garrick.
Yes, good morning, Carol. As we look ahead to this Friday in New York City and Manhattan, President Bush, as he reported, is coming to town this afternoon. We assume he'll be visiting the site of the terrorist attack there in Lower Manhattan and attend a prayer service here before returning to Washington. We're looking now at Lower Manhattan, and as you can see, the weather has turned foul once again. Throughout the early morning hours, there have been a series of thunderstorms, electrical storms passing through, which has interrupted the rescue work. It's been stop, stop again. Once the weather clears up, of course, it will continue. But as we look at what's happening in Manhattan and has happened overnight, there's some very interesting scenes. In Union Square, just above this part of Lower Manhattan, there was a vigil last night, and for New Yorkers, I think we're getting used to this. It's a familiar scene and yet a very important one. A mixture of American flags and candles there, but above all, it's not just the candles and the flags, it's the people coming together, spending time, not so much an official service as just being together and communing in this community in Union Square in the heart of Manhattan. Time to be together, time to be alone, time to think and reflect and remember. And remembering is what Americans across the nation will be doing on this Friday. The President has called for a National Day of Prayer and Remembrance at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. will be held the principal service. The National Cathedral, of course, has been the site of so many famous services over the years. President Bush will be in attendance, and he's also asking Americans across the country to remember and to pray and to offer their prayers. As far as New Yorkers are concerned, they'll be getting a little bit more of their city back in Manhattan itself. That is to say that much of the lower part of Manhattan, as you can see, from 14th Street there in the upper part of the map on your screen, below 14th Street down to the World Trade Center area to Battery Park at the tip of the island, has been closed to traffic since Tuesday's attack. Well, as of Friday, traffic proceeded all the way down to Canal Street, which runs through Little Italy and Chinatown and Lower Manhattan, an improvement. Manhattanites will be getting a good bit of their lower part of the island back, and no doubt within an hour or two there will be traffic jams there. As far as traffic jams are concerned, we're all waiting to see what President Bush's visit does here. Usually a presidential visit to Manhattan snarls traffic all through the city. Of course, the White House is going to try to avoid as much inconvenience as possible, but New Yorkers are ready for that visit. I'm sure they're going to welcome the president, and they're also prepared for the traffic jams, which no doubt could be severe. Anyway, back to you now, Carol and Jonathan.
So much, Garrick, and battling traffic and battling the bad weather out there, as are you, Garrick. I know we had to bring you inside because of this storm, which has slowed down some of the rescue operation. I think, Jonathan, you've got more on that.
The rescue work has been affected. Also, in a smaller way, has our work. Alessio Vinci joins us now on the line. We haven't got a satellite connection because of that weather. What else is going on there, Alessio?
Well, Jonathan, rain, and more rain. I cannot imagine how all this water coming from the sky can make the work of those rescue workers there even more difficult and miserable. The chances, however, to find anybody alive underneath that rubble are growing dim. Rescue workers, however, are telling us that they will continue, and they continue to hope that perhaps underneath that rubble somebody somewhere underneath perhaps a big chunk of concrete or an airtight void is still alive. There are still more than 4,700 people missing underneath, believed to be underneath that rubble, and certainly those rescue workers digging there, they must think some of them, at least even one of them, should be alive. There is also, of course, concern for the safety of the rescue workers themselves. Some of the buildings nearby what was once the World Trade Center may have suffered some structural damage, and there is, of course, some concern about their stability. One of those buildings is the American Express building, and rescue workers used it as a morgue and as a triage center. It was evacuated on Wednesday, and on Thursday, workers were pulled back from the area nearby. We understand also the officials are keeping a close eye on it. More than 6,000 tons of debris have so far been removed by exhausted and determined rescue workers. Those debris taken to Staten Island where they are being examined by the FBI, who is searching for some more clues, which could perhaps reveal the identity of the rescue of the hijackers. Perhaps the most frustrating part of this rescue operation, Jonathan, is the fact that so far mostly what has been recovered from the site are body parts. The latest figures that were released last night speak for themselves. 184 sets of human remains have been found, and only 7 whole bodies, of which 35 have so far already been identified. The numbers, of course, will change. We know that authorities here have requested more than 5,000, between 5 and 10,000 body bags, and certainly that we expect the final number of this tragedy to rise to. Finally, just to give you a sense about how strong and the magnitude of the disaster, one of the engineers who was telling us that the site there near the where the World Trade Towers were standing is like a living hell. Jonathan?
A living hell and a nightmare that doesn't end. In addition to all of the other challenges that these rescue workers are facing, it has been 3 days. What about fatigue? How are they carrying on?
Jonathan, we're speaking about 3 days, but we know that this site will be a work in progress for the weeks and perhaps months to come. We are still in the very early days, early moments of this rescue operation to sift through that entire debris. Imagine 2 110 stories buildings, 2 planes, all crashed into the same place. I mean, it must be an operation of incredible size. And of course, those rescue workers right now still very much determined with the hope that perhaps somewhere underneath that rubble there is somebody alive. Once 1 or 2 weeks will have passed, and the chances of finding somebody alive then will be really, really, really small, then perhaps the fatigue and the hardship of this operation will start to be felt a lot more. Another reminder: underneath that rubble there are still believed to be 300 firefighters, 30 police officers, and of course these are some of their comrades, some of the colleagues of these people, and of course the fact that knowing that a friend and a colleague is underneath there is giving them another reason to search even harder and even with more determination, Jonathan.
Alessio Vinci in New York, thanks very much. It's a story in a way of a superhuman effort, but there are so many stories of missing people, of last-minute phone calls, of concerns and fears. It is raining now once again in New York. The work just gets harder and harder, and the people who are watching these images along with us have one more worry, one more concern. The rescue work will likely only be slowed and made rather even more difficult. CNN's Larry King spoke with some of those who've been affected by these events.
I actually spoke to Mark the day before the incident. I did not hear from him the morning of the tragedy. I found that out when I called my daughter-in-law just casually, and she was screaming, and she said a friend just told her that something went into the World Trade Center right near Mark's office. And I started to cry, and I turned on the TV, and I just couldn't imagine such a tragedy happening. And when I saw where it hit and I knew where his office was located, immediately I just lost it. And I really didn't sleep. And then the next day we've been in the city, and we've been in the city today, checking lists, going from place to place, just doing whatever we can to find out if anyone knows of his whereabouts or who spoke to him in his last moments, and even just to meet somebody, to speak to anyone who's going through the same experience as we are in that knew Mark in Cantor Fitzgerald.
He called me at 9 o'clock and told me that the building next door to him just exploded, and it was on, and I said, what do you mean exploded? And he said, flames are coming out, people are on the roof, I gotta go. And he hung up, and that was the last I heard from him.
He said, Shelley, I think the building just got hit by a plane or a bomb or something like that, and I have to get out of here. I have to leave as soon as I can.
Those stories are told time and time again, and New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, well, he said it plainly yesterday. Nearly 5,000 people are unaccounted for. Each with loved ones, and families are going to national armories now with dental records and photographs, homemade flyers. CNN's Maria Hinojosa has a look at their stories.
Just 7 weeks ago, Anne McGovern posed with her new grandson minutes after he was born.
I've never seen her look so happy as when he was born. She was there. She was so excited.
But now her daughter Terry wants that smiling picture on television. Her mother worked on one of the top floors of the World Trade Center. Her daughter wonders if anyone has seen her alive.
We were interviewed by police detectives, and we had filled out a questionnaire, and it was really like, what jewelry would she have been wearing? Do you know what she had on? Did she have any identifying body marks?
Her sister Liz worked in the World Financial Center across the street, but managed to escape. She was supposed to meet her mother that day for lunch.
I was just about to call her, and I can't believe it. I don't think it's set in yet. I just feel so like powerless, and I wish I could have done something.
That same awful feeling consumed an emergency center on Lexington Avenue, where authorities are compiling a list of the missing. It's become a place of public grieving and a place to hope for miracles.
He was on 104th floor, Canterbury Street. We've gone to hospitals. We've called every hotline. They don't know where we can't find him. He's not on any list. So
hope is the word, the emotion that keeps these people going. But that hope hits hard against the reality that thousands of body bags have already arrived into New York City.
Triage centers remain relatively quiet. The one at Stuyvesant
At a center for Mexican immigrants, 15 friends are confirmed dead so far. Radios are kept on in hopes there'll be word of hundreds of others, immigrants from Mexico who labored in the Twin Towers, hoping to make a better life.
In my heart, I feel that I'm crying.
But there is not much concrete news for these people today, just fears for the worst.
My mother was so excited that my son was born. She was there at the birth 7 weeks ago, and he's not going to know her.
And so there's resignation. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
All through the last few hours and days, we've had live pictures from the Pentagon of the important recovery work that's going on there. Right now, some very important work. Oddly enough, though, no pictures. There's bad weather moving into the area, and our live images are not available. But we can tell you about the news that they have found in the rubble there, the black boxes of the jet that crashed on Tuesday. CNN's Bob Franken joins us now with more. Bob?
Jonathan, the Pentagon is going to be putting out an announcement about that shortly. The sources say that they'll be announcing that about 4 o'clock this morning, which was just a little over 2 hours ago, the boxes were located. They are flight data and voice recorders that were on the American Airlines 757, which was crashed into the building on Tuesday morning. The search for the boxes, the ones that can have such important information, the search was hampered by the fact that there was such a clutter of rubble, as you can imagine, after the huge plane crashed into the Pentagon. We've seen time and time again the gash, the concerns about a collapse, the difficulties in searching, all of that type of thing. But there had been telltale pings. We had been told by officials that they had been briefed and told that on Wednesday and Thursday, the identifying pings, as they're called, had been heard by searchers, but they just were not able to get to the area where they felt they were located. They were able to do that at 4 o'clock this morning. Meanwhile, they continue to go through the rubble. They're trying to make sure that every bit of it is in a position where it will not collapse. There was a small fire that re-erupted overnight, very small fire, about 10:30 last night. It was quickly put out. One of the problems they have is that there are still glowing embers. Right now, there shouldn't be too much of a problem with what we're seeing here. That was what occurred last night. There shouldn't be much of a problem now, John, because as you reported, it is raining, so that should not be the problem. Meanwhile, the search goes on for casualties. The Pentagon officials are now estimating that there could be 190 who were killed in this. That would include the 64 people who were on that American Airlines plane. In addition to which, there's planning that's going on here. Probably the most notable thing we should mention is that a Pentagon source tells CNN that there are plans to call up as many as 50,000 reservists around the country to supplement the military planning and action and protection that is going on in the wake of the attacks on the World Trade Centers and, of course, here at the Pentagon. And one other thing, the National Day of Prayer will include services here at the Pentagon this morning, services that are very close to home, of course, because of the attack on this building. Jonathan?
Bob, a question for you. There are ships at sea on both coasts of the United States, and now this call for reservists or consideration of this call. How real is this? How symbolic? How much saber rattling is going on? Or is the Pentagon really preparing for something?
Well, it's very, very little, very few people who suggest that this is saber rattling. There's almost a belief in the United States that there is a necessity, at the very least, to retaliate for these attacks, these catastrophic attacks in the United States. And there are many people saying that this is really going to be a longer range matter than that there is a military reality now that the United States for the foreseeable future is going to have to be on what amounts to a war footing.
Bob Franken at the Pentagon. Thanks very much. Carol.
Jonathan, the search for suspects now is spanning the globe this morning, from the Philippines to a cruise ship, a Carnival cruise ship off the coast of Florida, where early this morning at 3 a.m. Eastern time here in the United States, the Coast Guard boarded the ship and took into custody and is detaining 2 people whom authorities say have a, and this is a quote, history of hijacking. They did not elaborate any further, nor do we yet have any direct link between this action on this cruise ship and the terrorist attacks on Tuesday. But they are being detained and they will be handed over to the FBI. As soon as we know more about these 2 passengers, we will let you know, of course. Of course, the FBI is focusing as well their search in the state of Florida, where they are investigating a flight school where instructors are now horrified to learn they may have trained 2 suicide pilots. CNN's John Zarella spoke to him.
Unfortunately, sadly enough,
Henry George feels pain, extreme frustration, and great regret.
I don't want to believe that what I did made him successful.
Last December 29th and 30th at his Opa-locka Flight Training School, George gave 2 Middle Eastern men some basic lessons in a simulator on how to fly a jet aircraft. The 2 men were Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shari. The FBI is now combing through apartments in South Florida, checking cars and mailboxes, all linked to Mohammed Atta. Law enforcement sources say Atta is a suspect in the attack, perhaps a pilot of one of the doomed jets. He was listed on the manifest of American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston. Marwan al-Shari, according to German authorities, was also aboard one of the hijacked planes. The story Atta and al-Shari gave their flight instructor was this.
They were on their way home, and they wanted the exposure to jet flying, or an introduction to jet flying, because they were hoping to get a job with their airline in their country.
George says they mentioned Egypt a couple of times, but generally during the 2 days, they didn't have much to say. No small talk.
They were low-key individuals, maybe even call them shy. There wasn't, they were not outspoken, opinionated type people.
In all, George says he spent 8 hours with the 2 men. They reserved their lessons with a credit card but paid in cash, $1,500. George says he wishes something about them had been suspicious.
He was using his own name. They provide you with credit card numbers. There was nothing that you would make you suspect that this individual was anything but above board.
George says they were just a couple of student pilots, and there was nothing special about their abilities.
What I can recollect from my memory is that we mostly did turns in a couple of approaches. I don't think we did any more than that.
What they didn't do, George says, was practice how to land. John Zarella, CNN, Miami.
New York City is returning to normal, if normal is having the military patrol the streets and the skies. Streets are being reopened, though. Most schools are in session, and even Broadway shows are turning on the lights again. But in the financial district, where the debris and the shock are deepest, stock exchanges will wait a bit longer before opening again. Alan Chernoff has that part of the story.
Pointing out that the rescue effort is far more important than trading stocks, exchange and government officials decided to wait until after the weekend to reopen.
The right thing to do for America, and certainly for those who are in the middle of this great tragedy that's been so heinously foisted upon us, is to resume trading 9:30 Monday morning.
A secondary consideration, telecommunications capacity. Immediately north of the World Trade Center site, the large dark building on the left here, is a telecom switching station through which 20% of the exchange's data normally flows. It is now out of commission. The local phone company Verizon is working furiously to rebuild that capacity, and the exchanges plan to test their systems on Saturday.
We'll be testing the systems as best we can. Obviously, we want to know what we need to know in order to open the markets at 9:30 on Monday morning.
A very different kind of rebuilding involves investor confidence. Securities and Exchange Commission Chair Harvey Pitt is trying to calm investors.
This is not an economic problem. It's a physical catastrophe. People are responding to a physical tragedy. That should not in any way, shape, or form cause anyone to believe that there will be something sinister like a Black Monday resulting from the opening of trading.
Exchange officials say no matter what the Dow and NASDAQ composite do when the markets reopen, they'll be prepared to handle the trading. Alan Chernoff, CNN Financial News, New York.
Even for the business community, it's not just about money, it is about heart, and it is about coming to help and joining a world of people who are contributing and contributing to charity, the business community, and what it's doing. CNN's Susan Lisovich reports.
New York's financial district remains shut down, but they are already back in business on this ping pong table 2 miles north. Employees of the consulting firm Cassina can't get to their lower Manhattan offices because the area is sealed off, but they're working in a makeshift office donated by a local business.
Obviously, finding space is amazing. 2 days later, we have a new phone number and some space to get back and continue doing what we need to do.
The Silicon Alley Reporter is offering 14,000 square feet of prime midtown office space free to businesses left homeless by Tuesday's terrorist attack. Another firm, Bluefly.com, is donating 9,000 square feet of space.
Domino's Pizza offered to send pizzas up for the new tenants, and we've had people who have volunteered engineering services and computer services and furniture rentals. So it's been pretty surprising, and we're obviously grateful for the response that's followed on from this.
We can give you any amount of voicemail.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah.
The CEO of the Silicon Alley Reporter says it is the right thing to do.
We have to realize that one of the reasons that people did this was to screw up our economy. It wasn't just to psychologically scar us, to kill people. They want to shut down the economy, and these companies, mid-sized companies, small-sized companies, are the bulk of our economy. And they're going to go out of business, and people are going to lose their jobs.
For those helping out in this time of crisis, it is goodwill and good business. Susan Lisovich, CNN Financial News, New York.
Well, there has been a development in the investigation of the terrorist attacks. The flight data and voice recorders, the so-called black boxes, have been recovered from the hijacked jet that hit the Pentagon. We're also going to check other developments in this story as well.
Around the world today, people pause to remember the victims of these attacks. And the Coast Guard took 2 people described as having a history of hijacking off a Carnival Cruise Line ship. That just about 3.5 hours ago.
And in the nation's capital, Congress and the White House agreed on a $40 billion emergency aid package for New York and the Pentagon. That is twice the amount of money that President Bush had requested.
In the coming days and weeks, much focus will be on Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. He's already requesting presidential authority to call up active duty reserves. Rumsfeld gave his reasons on CNN's Larry King Live.
I don't think of it as retaliation. I don't think of it as punishment. I think of it as self-defense. The United States of America has every right to defend itself, and that is what it is about. It is consciously saying that countries and entities and people who actively oppose the United States and damage our interests by acts of violence, acts of war, are our enemies. And they are people and organizations and entities and states that we have every right to defend ourselves against.
You can watch Larry King Live tonight at 9 Eastern here on CNN. As the investigation broadens, it extends further from U.S. shores. Police activity related to the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington has been reported in Europe and Asia. Paul Beaver is a defense analyst specializing in Middle East terrorism. He runs his own firm called ABA Westminster. He was formerly with Jane's Defense Weekly, but he has brought his perspective to our coverage on many issues. He joins us now from London. There is an enormous force mobilizing on behalf of the United States. NATO has pledged its support. U.S. ships are at sea and the reserves are being considered. an enormous force. Is it the right force, and what to do with it after these attacks on Tuesday?
Well, I think you're right. There is a huge mobilization of military hardware around the world, intelligence sources and resources as well. But this isn't just an attack on the United States, you know. I think those of us in Europe here believe this is an attack on the whole Western way of life. The fact that there were British people, German people, French people in the Twin Towers at the time, the fact that we have daily contact with New York and Washington, D.C. makes it our battle as well. I think that the first thing that has to be done, of course, is to show to the American people a resilience and to show the rest of the world that America isn't going to stand by. That is being done. Now America has a number of military options. The most important of those, of course, is to get the alliance behind it. By going to Article 5 of the Washington Treaty of 1949, there are now 18 nations standing together against terrorism and to try and do something in self-defense about what happened. And other countries are going to join in as well. So it doesn't really matter at the moment what military hardware is there, because we've got enough military hardware. What we've got to work out is who actually did it, where they are, and how best to deal with them and all the other terrorist groups in the world.
How best to deal with them? That's the question. There are enormous forces that you've talked about of a 20th century kind, the kinds of conventional armies that fight on the battlefield, that fight in the sky, that fight on the water. But they're taking on a very particular foe. If indeed it is a small group of terrorists who have carried out these acts with some kind of state support, they're essentially going after private citizens operating out of different territories across the world, perhaps under different governments. Is that the kind of enemy that the West is prepared to face effectively?
We've had a real problem, I think, in the West, that we were prepared and being prepared to fight since the end of the Cold War, what we call modern warfare. In other words, the high technology, 15,000 feet, no ground troops, no body bags, precision-guided weapons. And that's what happened in Kosovo, and we won. This is not that. The enemies of Western civilization are fighting what they call and what we would, I think, describe as total warfare, using every means at their disposal. We have got to get away from this high technology point of view. We have, rather like the CIA and the FBI, have been mesmerized by technology and by satellites and eavesdropping on telephone conversations. We've got to stop this. If we're going to fight these terrorists, we've got to use human intelligence, we've got to use human resources. This is hand-to-hand fighting, if you like, in the modern age. We have got to be prepared to meet their total war with our total war. It's going to mean a few of our civil liberties may disappear and a few of our freedoms temporarily will go, but we have to be prepared, I think, to take the war to the terrorists, and we have to get the international community behind us, and we have to do it with the rule of law. This isn't going to be discriminate launching of cruise missiles against caves in Afghanistan. This has got to be done properly.
A decade ago, a man named George Bush, who was president of the United States at the time, led an international coalition in a war in the Middle East. It ended up with the extraordinary success and the liberation of Kuwait. Are there any lessons for George W. Bush to learn from George Bush Sr.?
Yes, I think there are a number of lessons that your president can learn from his father. The first is to get going quickly. It did take George Bush a little while to get underway. I seem to remember Margaret Thatcher, famous words that were caught by a tape recorder, "Come on, George, we've got to do something." Now, exactly right, we have got to do something about it. Now, President George W. Bush is a very intelligent man. He has very good advisors. He will know exactly what
Paul
has
Beaver,
to be
I'm sorry
done.
to interrupt you. We're going live to the Pentagon now, where we're hearing a briefing. Let's
I
listen
don't
in.
think it was any surprise where they were found. They were found right where the plane came into the building, right where the data recorder and the voice recorder should have been. They were right at the crash scene.
And with deep into the building or shallow? I mean, give us a sense of exactly where.
I don't know where they were on the airplane, but they probably were very, very close to that particular part. If you look at what an airplane image might be inside the building, they were found. They were pretty much knew where they were by virtue of where the aircraft came in.
Were they found in the same location where you were getting a signal from since yesterday?
We were not ever getting a signal from the black boxes yesterday. That was an erroneous report.
Mr. Bridges, how significant is this to all the fire and recovery crews that are operating on this? Is this a big deal to them?
Well, I think it's just another measure of success. It's another step forward as opposed to stasis. It's a significant development, and it's, we're moving ahead.
And how difficult was it to actually get the black boxes out? What was the surrounding debris like around it?
Well, all I can tell you about that is that particular part of the building is extremely fragile. It's unstable. We've been spending quite a bit of time trying to shore up that area. the columns down on the bottom floors are basically gone, and they've been trying to shore it up with wooden beams. It is dangerous working in there, but we are trying to maximize the safety of those personnel in the building when they are working on this stuff.
Did the person who tell you on the remains and how that's going, what kind of numbers you're looking at as far as bodies pulled out, and is that ongoing at this hour?
I'm not going to get into numbers. I'm going to leave that to the Pentagon. I mean, those are their people, and I think they'd like that responsibility. We have, however, continued the search and rescue operations, search and recovery operations through the night. We were actually conducting the search and recovery operations when the spot fire flared up last night. We suspended those, but they were back working in the building about a half an hour after the fire was contained once again.
If I can follow up about that fire, are there more concerns about flare-ups, or what's the situation with the hotspots?
Yes, if you recall when I think Chief Plogger was down here before, we've declared the fire under control. That does not mean that it's out. There are still spot fires that have sprung up. The one last night was the most visible one. We expect that there will be more. It is not unusual in this circumstance, especially when we're not removing the rubble.
How much of a factor could the weather be today, Mr. Bridges, the wind and rain?
Actually, I was thinking about that on the way in. I really don't know. The fire is really out. I'm not sure that any moisture is going to get into the bowels of the building. So, I mean, where the roof is still intact, the rain isn't going to help us.
The wind and the shoring up, though?
We'll have to see.
Did the person who told you that the boxes could be damaged but could still yield information give you any kind of idea about when we might find some information or find out how much they might yield?
Well, I think that's probably going to come from the FBI and the NTSB. I mean, the boxes are now in federal hands and part of the federal investigation. Arlington County does no longer have a role in that.
Were the black boxes, though, were they removed immediately from the FBI and taken from this location to the NTSB right across the river? I mean, is it possible that the sophisticated equipment they have over there is already being used to try to analyze this?
I'm not going to speculate. I frankly don't know.
And we don't know what sort of boxes they were, whether they were analog or digital. Do we know?
There was a voice recorder and there was a data recorder.
They were removed from the scene already?
Well, they've been removed from the crash scene. I do not know where precisely they are, other than the fact that they are in the federal authorities' hands and they are now part of a federal investigation.
Is this the first of the 4 crash sites where they have managed to recover both the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder?
I believe that is the case, but I'm here for this particular site.
Thank you. What time were the boxes found again?
3:40 a.m.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back at 10 a.m., somewhere between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. for our regular update. Yes.
And so a little less than 3 hours ago to the minute, the black boxes were found in the darkness and rubble at the Pentagon. We were just hearing from a spokesman for Arlington County who said they are damaged but may still yield useful information. We don't know what's in them. He didn't, in fact, know exactly where they are right now, except to say that they're in the hands of federal authorities who will be examining them, I would imagine, in haste. One more note, there was a fire that burned briefly overnight. We had been told that the fire was out at the Pentagon. Some contradictory information there, both a remark that the fire is out and then a remark that the fire is under control but not entirely out, that there are still hot spots in the damaged portion of the building that represent a real threat to the people who are working there, but the recovery work continues. Bob Franken has been watching all of this unfold and he joins us now. Bob?
And some other contradictory information, Jonathan. Officials had said that they were briefed yesterday and told that there had been some of the pings coming from those boxes that had been detected for a couple of days previous. Some people were denying that, but we were told by Pentagon sources today that, in fact, there had been some telltale pings, and it was just a matter of trying to locate them and, more importantly, trying to get through all the rubble and getting to the area where they might be found. And as we heard, they were found shortly before 4 a.m. today, about 3:40, as we heard. Now, there's an interesting dynamic that goes on here. Here at the Pentagon, you get the federal perspective, the military perspective. Out about a mile away where that news conference was held, that is where the local officials who have been so important to this recovery effort, that is where they have their briefings and their announcements. And sometimes there's a race to get this material out from one perspective or the other. But in any case, the location of the boxes we are told that they are now in the hands of the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, which is doing what it has done so many times in the past, analyzing the data, giving a listen to the one box that has the voice data, the voice material on it. We, of course, have a little bit of a preview of what might be found. Barbara Olson, who is a commentator, was a commentator, and the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General, had called her husband as the plane was being diverted and had said that, in fact, hijackers had taken over the control of the plane. She talked to Ted Olson, her husband, before the plane actually crashed into this building. But now the all-important data boxes have been recovered. They're in the hands of the National Transportation Board, under, of course, the control of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is an important step potentially into the investigation into what exactly happened on that American Airlines flight. Jonathan?
Bob Franken at the Pentagon, where they have two jobs on this day, assuring the nation's defense and also still getting to the bottom of what is a mysterious attack after all. Carol?
And a very meticulous investigation as well, and one that Congress approved $40 billion in aid, which will go towards the criminal investigation as well as rebuilding efforts in Washington and New York. Representative John Sweeney, he is a Republican congressman, was part of that decision, and he joins us now with the latest on that. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Carol.
All right, I just want to get a sense of when you think the money is going to be distributed.
Well, we'll vote today or early this morning to appropriate this emergency supplemental. It's essentially $40 billion, $10 billion to be used for intelligence and defense purposes, $10 additional billion, which will be used at the discretion of the president, who will have 15 days in which to submit to Congress his list of requirements. And then $20 billion to what you would call local aid to New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania to cover their costs as it relates to the domestic expenses, public safety, humanitarian, the search and rescue missions that we are watching the images of on CNN all day.
Yeah, images, certainly in images, as well as a decision here on aid that really hits close to home for you personally. You represent a district in New York City, and as I understand it, there are members of the Republican Party who are missing in this wreckage, and some of them your own personal friends.
Well, actually, my district is slightly out of the city, but there are a number of folks who are considered unaccounted for who are personal friends. So while the nation suffered great losses indeed, some of us, New Yorkers in particular, have suffered very personal losses in this tragedy.
Well, as you attend meetings at the White House, I know you've been there. I know you've been hearing discussion of retaliation or certainly response. I want to get your read on some remarks made by the Defense Secretary. He said yesterday to CNN that to sustain America's way of life will require, quote, a war, a major, long-range, broad-based, sustained effort. In your meetings at the White House, can you tell us, is the United States preparing to go to war?
Well, most of the meetings that I attended were classified, so a lot of the detail can't be shared, but I will say that it's very obvious to me that the federal authorities in this administration are focused in on both short-term responses and long-term solutions to the problem of terrorism, and I salute that. You know, one of the problems in America is we really have lowered our guard and not maintained the kind of vigilance I think we're going to need to. The first change, obviously, of what occurred this past Tuesday is that's no longer going to be the case, or no longer going to be the way America is going to be able to operate in order to ensure the safety and security of our citizens. But let me say this. I think as most members in Congress, we want to see this done right. We want to make sure that when retaliation and when an answer comes from the United States, it's going to be as complete an answer as it can be, even in the short term. And I liken it a little bit to the Godfather movie. I think when the family takes care of its business this time, it's going to be, the family business is going to be as complete as it can possibly be at one fell swoop.
Congressman, and as anybody can remember for any of the Godfather movies, it was extremely violent, extremely bloody, and marked by a severe loss of life. So I respect the confidentiality that you have in these meetings as you try to make these decisions, but I want to get a very clear sense, though, as to whether this administration is preparing for American casualties.
Well, you know, you have to understand, Carol, that the administration is focused on the rescue and recovery missions, the ongoing investigation. And I think it's very obvious from the statements that have been made publicly by administration officials and from all the other information that's been provided out there that all options are being considered and being left open. I think the first, and obviously and rightly so, the first and foremost responsibility, though, is to ensure the safety and security, the continued safety and security of American citizens. Where that mission ends and a mission to go forward and take some sort of punitive action on those who perpetrated this heinous crime begins and ends, I don't think is going to be all that particularly clear until it happens.
But Congressman, can you at least give the American people a sense of what they should be preparing for in a Western response?
Well, I think they should be preparing for the eradication of terrorism and terrorists over the course of some time. Colin Powell said terrorism isn't new and it's been with us for quite some time and it's going to take some time to eradicate it, but we are speaking in those absolute terms, and we ought to be speaking in those absolute terms, and that means every available option that this government has at its disposal ought to be considered and indeed is being considered.
Congressman John Sweeney, as your fellow congressmen have said, necessary and appropriate force still to be determined. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Jonathan?
The search for suspects in connection with the attack against New York and Washington is worldwide, but the list of suspects is narrow, pointing sharply at just one man, Osama bin Laden. CNN national correspondent Mike Boettcher looks now at the man behind the headlines and the reasons behind the suspicions.
Swirling amid the clouds of smoke billowing from these symbols of power, the terrible question: who could be behind such a devastating act of terrorism? Though the evidence is still being examined, one name tops the list of suspects. It's a name that's been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list since 1999, Osama bin Laden. The 44-year-old bin Laden, through a spokesman, denies any involvement, but U.S. intelligence agencies say his fingerprints are unmistakable. In Western intelligence circles, bin Laden has been well known for years for this document, a call for jihad, or holy war. Bin Laden discussed that call to arms in his first ever television interview with CNN in 1997.
We declared a jihad, a holy war, against the United States government because it is unjust, criminal, and tyrannical.
You know, the man is ruthless, and, you know, he believes that he should declare war against the United States. And this kind of appeal, this kind of call actually appealed to many young Muslims all over the world.
But Osama bin Laden doesn't come from a family of extremists. He was born the son of a billionaire Saudi businessman, the 17th of 52 children, some of whom live in the United States. His father built the largest construction business in Saudi Arabia. Osama joined the family operation at a young age, developing an expertise in demolition. But in 1979, the religious 23-year-old left his comfortable life and took a radical turn. That year, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and bin Laden joined the Afghan opposition, offering money, equipment, and know-how. By 1986, bin Laden was running training camps and leading his own troops into battle. When the war ended, bin Laden founded Al-Qaeda, a multinational terrorist network. Its members used the most up-to-date technology, satellite phone, email, fax, to coordinate their activities from all over the world. It drew thousands of volunteers.
They are either direct followers, taking direct command and order from bin Laden, or they are small cells and groups who believe bin Laden is a godfather. His message is almost like a religious order.
When the Gulf War broke out in 1990, an outraged bin Laden began to target a new enemy, America. He declared a holy war against his new enemy and a set of demands that hold to this day. Bin Laden wants U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia. He opposes U.S. bombing campaigns in Iraq. He is against U.S. support of Israel, and he objects to U.S. backing of Arab nations he deems un-Islamic, such as Egypt.
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq.
In the next decade, Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda organization would be implicated in a series of attacks on Americans at home and abroad. In 1992, the first American victims, 18 servicemen killed in Somalia, a Muslim nation embroiled in famine and civil war. Bin Laden admitted his involvement to CNN.
With Allah's grace, Muslims in Somalia cooperated with some Arab holy warriors who were in Afghanistan. Together, they killed large numbers of American occupation troops.
1993, a bomb at the World Trade Center. 6 people killed and thousands injured. Bin Laden denies any involvement, but he was named one of many unindicted co-conspirators. 1995, 1996, Bin Laden possibly linked to 2 bombings in Saudi Arabia. 24 U.S. troops dead. 1998, bombs at 2 U.S. embassies in Africa killed 224 people. Bin Laden has been indicted as the mastermind behind the attack. 2000, the bombing of the USS Cole kills 17 U.S. sailors. Osama bin Laden is the principal focus of the investigation. 2001, bin Laden is now suspect number 1 in the worst terrorism act in modern history. A series of attacks that came without warning. But there may have been a hint in this videotape, which was circulating throughout the Middle East and on the internet this summer. It shows bin Laden training young militants, some who seem as young as 11, for his holy war. Bin Laden makes an impassioned plea for recruits in the 2-hour tape. It also indicates bin Laden is planning additional anti-American operations. For the last several years, bin Laden is believed to be in hiding in the remote mountains in Afghanistan, where he is beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. The country is dominated by the Taliban, a movement of religious students turned warriors who have imposed their harsh interpretation of Islam. The Taliban have declared that bin Laden is their guest, providing he does not attack other nations. In 1997, bin Laden tried to explain the logic behind his tactics.
The U.S. today has set a double standard, calling whoever goes against its injustice a terrorist. It wants to occupy our countries, steal our resources, impose agents on us to rule us, and then wants us to agree to all this. If we refuse to do so, it says we are terrorists.
And he made clear he had no intention of changing his ways or his future plans.
You'll see them and hear about them in the media, God willing.
If the West acts against Osama bin Laden one way or another, Arab nations, Muslim nations will have to respond. For perspective on that, we're joined now by the editor of the Arabic language newspaper Al-Quds, Abdel Bari Atwan. He joins us now from our London studios. Let me ask you, first of all, since you and your newspaper heard rumors of these attacks some weeks before they were carried out, what, if anything, you're hearing now?
What we are hearing, actually, the Arab people start to question, the wisdom of the American foreign policies, and they believe, the Americans actually are paying a heavy price for their unjust foreign policies, and they would like, they would like a new page of cooperation between Arab and the United States based on justice, based on more understanding, based on implementation of UN Security Council resolutions, and, stop the sanctions against Arab and treat everybody in the world and fairly basis as equal.
Let me jump in and ask you this: the things that you've mentioned are demands, they are requests, they are complaints that have been made of U.S. international policy before Tuesday. But Tuesday, everything changed. What does the Arab world expect? What does the Arab world want to see from the U.S. response to what happened Tuesday?
Now, United States is working very hard to establish a coalition, exactly the same one like what it has established during the Gulf War. Now they are asking Arab and Muslim countries to join this coalition. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, maybe other Arabs. It seems there is a military preparation or a preparation for a military action against Afghanistan. So, but the problem is, how these Arab governments will convince its people that they are going to fight a fellow other Arab Muslims or Muslim country. So, and what price? Are they, the American will listen this time to the Arab demands to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, to treat them in better way, to stop humiliating of the Arab people and Arab governments, to listen to their friends in the Middle East, to seek their advice. This is what we are hearing in the Arab world. Said, okay, military preparation, they want the Arab and the Muslim to participate this time. It is different from Kuwait. We were promised by the American, by the President Bush, the senior at that time, that he will have a peace conference and there wouldn't be any war in the Middle East. Now we are witnessing a war in the Middle East. Now that we are back to the square one. No peace process, and no American involvement.
And let me point out another way that it is different from Kuwait. You rightly point out that this is not Kuwait. Kuwait was one nation. We heard the U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell say that the military action would not be limited to one place, that the United States and its allies would go against terrorists wherever they are, wherever they threaten Western citizens. What's going to happen if the U.S. and its allies really do that?
Well, actually, I don't know. I heard some American military expert or ex-military, personnel, high-ranking personnel, actually were talking about attacking Iraq, attacking Afghanistan, attacking Iran. So I don't know what the wisdom behind this. Is the American going to launch a war against the whole of the great chunk of Middle East, and who will support them there, and at what purposes? Until now we don't have a concrete evidence that Osama bin Laden or a certain Islamic group behind this attacks. But even so, you can't go and destroy other Arab countries. You have to understand the resentment in the Arab world against the American foreign policies because of these kind of irrational attacks. The sanction against Iraq, the bombarding of Iraq, encourage those radicals, encourage those extremists to target the United States as the #1 enemy, as a target of terrorism. So I believe, any further attacks, it will make the situation worse and worse. I believe the Americans should be more rational and more patient.
We thank you so much for talking with us. Carol.
Jonathan, hundreds of Arab Americans were actually injured or killed in the collapse of the World Trade Center, as were so many other nationalities. Yesterday, I heard a radio report of a man trying to run down a Pakistani-American woman in a shopping mall parking lot. He was screaming at her to go home. So the question we asked this morning is history repeating itself? Arab Americans, and we do mean Arab Americans, are experiencing the same kind of backlash that struck at Japanese Americans after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Vigilantes targeted German Americans after World War II. Velma Gutierrez reports.
December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor.
Absolute shock to think that our country was attacked.
September 11th, 2001, New York, Washington, Pennsylvania.
I felt that my country has been attacked.
These are among the darkest moments in America's history.
They blamed us for the war. The gardeners are working and kids will go by, driving by, and throw a bottle at them, and people spat on them and, call them dirty Japs.
History has a way of repeating itself.
Muslims, Arabs, people who look remotely Arab, who may be from somewhere else in the Middle East, in New York, pulled out of cabs, beaten. An Islamic center in Texas had its windows shot out.
Like other Japanese Americans, Bob and Sumi Hayamitsu lived through it all 60 years ago. They say this is what happens when the perpetrators look like you.
Even our government classified us as aliens.
Bob, Sumi, and thousands of other Americans were rounded up and placed in war relocation camps.
You might call it a concentration camp because it had barbed wires, guard sentry towers with the machine guns turned inward.
Dr. Jasser Hattout says he can't imagine that happening at all. It's so un-American.
I'm not another entity. I am American. I know no other country. Squeeze my hands real tight. Squeeze.
Dr. Hattout is a neuroradiologist at the VA hospital in Los Angeles.
Now give me a real big smile. Show me your teeth. Real big.
They're not mine.
All right.
79-year-old Edward Jackson is his patient. Jackson is a World War II veteran. He was a POW. He remembers the anti-Japanese sentiment, but thought it was wrong.
I came from a very poor family.
And my friends in high school were the Japanese, the Chinese, and the blacks.
Jackson says some people are lashing out again.
I heard somebody say, boy, I wish I could run across one of those Arabs. I'd shoot the son of a bitch. That's what I heard today at this hospital, you know, and that's terrible.
Let's not be barbaric. Let's be human beings and treat the others as human beings.
A principle all three of these Americans, Jackson, Hayamitsu, and Hatut, all believe in. Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
CNN's continuing coverage goes on right now. I'm Carol Lynn.
And I'm Jonathan Mann. Stay with us.